In 2 days the whole underground city was buzzing with activity. Mark Hemingway had improvised a laboratory and was isolating the various minerals of the corridor walls, seeking materials for ammunition. Major Matson drilled all the able-bodied men and organized them under group officers. The crippled men and women were soon cooperating in a central factory unit, where hand forges and smelting pits were conducting crude weapons of war. There were many women working even at the heavier tasks. The enfeebled patients lay on their cots and rolled bandages or did other light tasks. Great stores of cooked food were being prepared against the day when every cook would be on the fighting lines. The able-bodied soldiers divided their time between drilling under Major Matson and erecting barriers as directed by old Jake, whose practical ingenuity used the abundant supply of cheap blasting powder to skillfully crumble corridor walls. Their one power crane heaped the rubble into thick barriers, each with a narrow defensible slit. Huge boulders were balanced, ready to fall into the opening when a flash match could be applied to a cloth fuse. They had been working a few minutes on the third morning when the radio outpost at the farthest entrance announced, "The beasts are coming!" There were no television screens, but the announcer's description was horrible enough. "They've got walking snakes in front, with triangular heads like rattlers, probably poisonous, but a bite from one of those babies would be enough anyway. They're 20 feet long. Now they're nearer. I wondered how they could come so fast. They're running! Every damned one of them has a row of short little legs that hustle them along. Oh, their hissing sounds like steam from hundreds of locomotives, even in this atmosphere." The announcer quieted down to a sense of awe. "Off to the side there's a group of big things. Big as 6 elephants with long, heavy tails dragging and small heads. They seem to be covered with some kind of scales. Up in the air is a flight of flying lizards, about 6 feet long, I should guess, and I can see their teeth flashing when a ship gets near. They keep trying to turn back, but the ships herd them in the air like a flock of flying sheep. Probably only dangerous when cornered. I wonder if they're poisonous. Ryan, there's a space several miles, a clear desert behind, and beyond there's a dark wave of beasts clear to the skyline. I can't see them because it's still too dark. It looks like a black ocean rolling at us." The announcer's voice stopped and the silence was oppressive. "Hell, I've seen worse than that in the DTs," cracked one of the alcoholics, but his hands trembled as he picked up the largest of the crude stone throwers. "This pop gun might stop one of the birds, but it won't do much against the giant elephants." Major Matson roared into a megaphone in the huge drill room. "Well, boys, this is it. We've got plenty to fight and damned little to fight with. If we can get all the big beasts with the disintegrators before they break down the barriers, we'll be okay. The Mars colony expects every man to shoot his damnedest. Let's go!" The cheering mob in loose order ran down the corridors with their pathetic little guns, Major Matson and Jake in the lead. Jake leaped on his new legs like a man of 20 and roared as if he had found a new hold on life. The buzz and hum of activity behind them continued. Forges flared, hammers clanged, and in the distance some of the patients were singing a martial hymn. John watched the dark tide approaching the cliff entrance from his observation slit high overhead. He leaned as close to it as his oxygen helmet would allow and spoke quietly into the transmitter. "They're bringing up the Magadons. I can see there is a strange ape-like creature riding each one and steering it with some kind of burning rod. They're about the size of men, but they look small in comparison. I wonder if those apes are in communication with ships or just ordinary desert anthropoids." He left the explanation to Zingar back in headquarters and continued to report the dawn approach. Overhead, almost 100 ships hovered close over the seething flow of animal and reptile life. Several were near the entrance, and the defenders experimentally tried out their weapons. The first barrage was from old explosive shell weapons, but as each shell flashed and roared towards the ships, it seemed to hit an invisible wall of force about 50 feet from the hull, where it exploded in empty air. The ships were not even rocked, but the Magnodons squealed in terror. Vibrations of the explosions jarred the doorframe, even the cliff itself. The disintegrator artillery scarred the thick hull slightly, but the invisible rays failed to penetrate far, even in a direct hit, and the weaving ships took most of these shots at glancing angles with no damage. The defenders tried their thunder-spreading atomic cannon once. Its lightning flash struck one of the tiny ship's full center, and a gaping hole burst inward and out the rear section of the hull so that the morning sky showed through. The defenders cheered when this was reported. The little ship lurched up into the air, and others drew near, grappling it with more tractor rays. John could see the unconscious form of old men carried past the ragged hole by helmeted figures and into another ship through joined hulls. When the crippled craft was released, it crashed quickly on the still frozen desert sand. Then it rolled over and lay still. But one shot from the atomic cannon took the force of one power jacket, and there were only 9 jackets left. Dr. Henderson ordered the atomic cannon withdrawn to the central defense area, against that time when the Martian ships would be flying down the high corridors, directing a river of snakes and flying lizards. The battle went on with disintegrator rays dropping scores of the air-screaming, twisting Mars snakes and 1 or 2 of the smaller group of magnetons. But the Martian ships, finding that the atomic weapon was no longer in operation, shielded one of the magnetons with their hulls as the great beast approached, and put its shoulders against the copper door. The locks held until the doors buckled in at the center, as if hit by a giant battering ram. Air hissed out, and a moment later the gigantic beast burst through, only to fall trumpeting to the ground under a disintegrator ray. In 30 seconds it was dead. But behind it slithered and ran the great snakes, with their gaping jaws and long dripping fangs. They seemed as numerous as the white flashing waves of an angry ocean shore. Overhead the roof was black with flying lizards bumping and crowding in the dim shadows, with ridiculous faint mewing sounds. Stone throwers dropped hundreds of these, and disintegrators stopped dozens of the running snakes, until a wall of dead flesh protected the defensive barrier. Major Matson gave the order, and a flash and roar of blasting powder dropped a great boulder into place. The corridor seemed almost still, shut off from the jungle sounds of their inhuman enemies. The men retreated in good order to the next defense wall. They realized that their ammunition must be conserved against the real menace, the thundering herd of magnetons, with their guiding, sheltering ships. The first corridor entrance was burst through after 10 minutes by one of the great beasts, which fell in the gap and had to be pulled back by the ships. Boulders rolled out like pebbles from further blows, until the opening was wide enough for a protecting ship to fly through, low over the sandy floor with a magneton nosing behind it. The great feet thumped deliberately down toward the Earthmen, plunging 10-inch tracks into the packed sand, each as large as a small round table. Shooting the apes from their backs did not stop them. John had withdrawn from the lookout post just as the first entrance door crashed. He then operated one of the disintegrator batteries until recalled to the council chamber. From there he learned that the same battle scene was being repeated at each barrier. Sometimes a magneton was killed before it broke through, sometimes after. The Martians protected the great beasts as well they could, hoarding their supply. Zingar said it would take 2 months to bring a new herd from the swamplands, as there was no way to transport them except on slow surface sleds. Because of the strange nature of this combat, the defenders suffered no casualties. The snakes and flying lizards were killed and piled up in front of each barrier. After each firing slit was sealed, there was a brief rest. At last the defenders attempted strategy. Seeing that under the present conditions it was only a matter of time, Major Matson called for volunteers to attempt to capture a shipload of the Martians to hold as hostages. About a dozen men made a sortie against the snakes, knowing it was futile, but succeeded in drawing the ship down over them. They were sucked up by the tractor rays and pulled into the tiny hull, but every man's pockets had been filled with gas capsules. And, as they fell unconscious under the paralysis mirrors, yellow clouds of gas filled the ship's cabin until the white-bearded old Martians were unconscious, too. The battle had been proceeding nearly to the central defense area, and now the atomic cannon flashed a hole through the Mars ship, high up in the hull, causing it to crash. A desperate charge of all the defenders kept the Mars snakes back long enough to allow the unconscious enemy and volunteers to be brought back behind the last and strongest barrier. They made it just before the first of the rescuing ships reached the spot. Several of the battered and atom-shocked men never recovered consciousness. All were carried to the hospital behind the fighting front. Then came a lull in the battle. The Magnodons and ships withdrew, leaving only the hissing and twisting snakes in the corridor and a small observation ship down the tunnel out of range. The flying lizards took this opportunity to escape. A few snakes that had crawled through were disintegrated. This was the situation faced by the Council of War at noon. Dr. Henderson's white coat was now splattered with blood, where he had carried and treated some of the wounded. His face seemed old and drawn as he addressed the council. "It looks bad. If we had 100 atomic power jackets left instead of 8, we might make it. I wonder if they know how limited our supply is." Under the emotional situation, Zingar's accent was more pronounced but intelligible. "Every word we speak is amplified by their distance receivers. A race that can faintly hear train whistles on Earth and can see the surface of your planet as if with a large telescope from the moon doesn't have much trouble to know what our situation is. But we have one bargaining point. Old Senegar was on that first ship, and his intelligence is in ratio to that of the other Martians as 100 to 1. They would concede almost anything to preserve his safety." "But how can we bargain since we have no way to escape the planet?" asked John. "Well, we might hold the young man as a permanent hostage until the time when Mars is in proximity to Earth again, a year from next August, and the colony's supply ship comes," suggested Mark Hemingway. "The old man won't live that long," said Zingar quietly. "This atmosphere would be fatal to him. Let me talk to my father." "Your father?" cried Mary. Quickly adjusting the headphone of the mind sounder, she poured her unconscious sympathy to her lover's receiving mind. He drew her to him gently and then turned and faced the others, still holding her. "Let me talk to him," he said. "I think I have an idea." The group walked hurriedly behind Zingar and Dr. Henderson toward the field hospital area. There was a silent drama of sympathy in the expression of these two Martians as Zingar stood near his father's hospital cot. They spoke rapidly but quietly in their own language. "What's he saying?" growled Jake. "Can we trust the young squirt?" "I don't understand," said John. "I only know a few of their words, but they keep repeating one word which means cripples or sick." At last the young Martian turned and spoke to them, but mostly to Mary. "How much do you love your native planet? Would you be willing to stay with us, all of you to be healed and made well, and serve to invigorate the stock of the Mars men?" There was a buzz of excitement and argument. Most of the Earthmen who had not seen the hidden Martian city were violently opposed, but a few were too sick to care, and many remembered that they were lost anyway when the atomic power jackets should be exhausted. John stood close to Molai and looked at her questioningly. "Don't stay for my sake, John," she said sadly. "Our instincts draw us to each other, but our minds are a whole generation apart. We would have constant misunderstandings. Remember, I am as old as Zingar." He hesitated a moment, then wrote, "But Mary and Zingar are planning to be married." "That's their business," she replied, looking at Mary. "Perhaps it is a reasonable chance to take when the husband is the older mentality, but I don't want a mental child for a husband. Besides, I've been remembering Nogar, my former lover, before I saw you." Their isolated dialogue was only a small murmur in the vocal excitement of the throng of Earth people, which suddenly quieted as Major Matson boomed over the crowd with his megaphone. "Well, shall we vote on it?" But Zingar raised his hand and cried, "Wait! My father should speak first." The old man sat painfully up in his bed and spoke into the microphone of the old amplifying set, so that his sibilant, whispering voice echoed the broken accents down the high vaulted ceilings of the great cave space. "Listen to me well, O selected people of a youthful race. This violence has been a vast folly. I should have realized before. My sense of aesthetic was so offended by your ugliness, especially by the sick and crippled amongst you, so that I did not realize your one great virtue which cancels all the rest. I have observed the cooperative efficiency of your defenses, especially the strange spirit of sacrifice in the little band who came out to trick us. We were not ready for that, and we have no such spirit of unselfishness among us. It is a virtue that Mars needs. Your very handicaps have taught you a lesson of group action, a lesson of inestimable worth. We need every one of your unique personalities in our community life. It will be a simple thing to heal you of your diseases and to prolong your lives. The memory of your sufferings will give new youth and a new spirit to Mars. Life, perhaps, even prove a biological salvation. Stay with us. We wish you well. The old man fell back exhausted and closed his eyes. John leaped to the platform and cried to the several hundred men and women before him, "That settles it. I'm for staying." He made an impassioned speech and stepped down. Others followed, but he was not very attentive to their words. Hilda crept to him, unobserved in the excitement. She said, "Oh, John, my hand can be healed. Now I will be proud to marry you, as you asked me 3 years ago, if you still want me." "Why, you dumb bunny, as if a bum flipper had anything to do with that." He took her in his arms. They did not even vote when the hands were called, or know that the decision had been made. When the supply ship arrived 1.5 years later, there were no signs of the colony left. Spread around on the sand were various artificial limbs, crutches, spectacles, hearing devices, and bits of clothing, scattered in between many bleached and weather-beaten bones. The ship's crew gathered up these medical relics as proof and sadly turned away. The captain thought it rather a pity, since the ship had been sent to bring the sick ones home, in response to a wave of indignation aroused 2 years ago by Hilda's broadcast from the district hospital. They carried a few of the bones back, carelessly scooped up by the electric shovel that gathered the crutches and other paraphernalia. An obscure scientist assistant at Johns Hopkins tried to arouse excitement by claiming that these were not human bones, but from anthropoid apes. However, there was another war brewing, and nobody would listen to him.